You can have the best of intentions and, in your mind be like, I want to be as aligned as possible. But if you don't create a system that actually supports that value, you're most likely going to fall to the level of whatever system or lack of system you have.
Have you ever felt like doing your share at home, yet your partner still seems overwhelmed and exhausted? In today's busy world, many dads are more involved than ever before, working hard, helping with the kids, and pitching in around the house, yet the tension still builds. Why? Because the mental load, the invisible planning, remembering, anticipating, and organizing often goes unnoticed and unevenly shared. If you've ever felt confused about why your efforts aren't landing the way you hoped, or you want a more connected, peaceful home without constant reminders of or resentment, this episode is for you. So, as always, and even if you're here for the first time, you are watching not the Dad Central show. I'm wrong, lower third. There we go. Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. As always, our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And we are today talking about from overload to aligned, rebalancing the mental load at home. Drew, opening thoughts on this?
Man, if there's something that I think is really important, it's this idea of being aligned at home. I think that if we can become aligned, it reduces a lot of the tension, the stress, and even, tearing away at the quality of the relationship sometimes. And of course, everyone benefits when that happens. So obviously, we wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't think it was important, but it's not always easy. I think, especially when, let's say both parents are working, or you know, um, there's been I'll say a more traditional, or there's just been, a unique way that you have, come to work things out in your family, but it may not actually be aligned or as healthily aligned as it could be, and so. Any shift like that is going to be challenging. So just be mindful of that. But I think it's really important.
Excellent, excellent. What we're going to be chatting about today, first things first, we're going to be talking about what is the mental load, and then why it creates friction, then from overload to aligned, and a real life example. So, Drew, let's talk about this concept, the mental load.
Well, for anyone who is a planner, the mental load is all of the thoughts, the analysis, the deadlines, the checklist. Here's what we got to do. Anticipating needs. It's a lot of time in your head. That's what I say. So, and in reality, as your family grows, and you have more involvement and you have more pressures and stresses and responsibilities, there's a lot to do when it comes to just the business of organizing and running a family. So things like scheduling appointments, keeping track of school or health events, managing, the day-to-day needs of groceries or clothes or extracurriculars or supplies for the house, or taking care of, your vehicles, whatever you got. And then the other aspect of this is, especially as last month we talked about this idea of like emotions and emotional regulation, is how do you support the needs of everyone in the family? So anyways, those are things that create a lot of mental load. Some carry it more than others, some, and I'm going to say this is a gross generalization, so please don't crucify me for this, but I think women are used to carrying a huge mental load. They spend a lot of time in their head thinking, evaluating, planning, expecting to meet the needs of everyone. Dads may not spend a lot of time there, depending on the dad. So again, but everyone is slightly different. Anyways,
Yeah.
again, this voice is affecting me, so I'm going to take a pause and you hop in here, Ed.
Yeah, I want to jump in and emphasize it's not about who works harder. It's about who carries the mental responsibility. And when I say that, I when I first read that, I go, it's a very interesting statement. And I've not too many times heard it put that way, but the mental responsibility, especially in the world we're living in today. There's so many things to do. There's so many distractions. The emphasis on the mental responsibility really stuck out with me when I repeat that in my head and say that mental responsibility. Many times, and generalization, you can come back to that, but a lot of us men, guys, we're good at that hard working. And then on the mental responsibility, we're not always there. We want to perform, and we're not taking a look at our mental fuel tank. Let me put it that way. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective to put out there. Drew, anything you want to add on that? Because I think it's a very interesting statement.
Yeah, the mental responsibility. It's interesting because responsibility, the word carries a weight, I believe. And, you know, rightly or wrongly, the traditional provider notion still exists for a lot of men. Doesn't mean it's universal, but it does still hold true in many cases. And at least we feel this sense of provision. And so when you say, well, I'm already carrying a lot of responsibility, and now you're going to tell me I'm going to carry this mental responsibility, I think as a man, honestly, or a father, it could be challenging. In all honesty, this concept might be challenging, but the whole idea, and this is why I put the emphasis on, is alignment. It doesn't mean, in my perspective, it doesn't mean you have to take on more. What it means is that you create a greater alignment between you and your partner. And that to me is tremendously valuable because it helps create a healthier relationship. It helps clarify expectations and who's doing what and how. And, it gives you an opportunity to at least recognize what your partner might be experiencing in terms of her load. And the offset, which we're going to talk about ways you can do that, really helps the whole overall functioning of the family as well as the whole overall functioning of your relationship. And that to me, that's really what we're focusing on this month is building healthier, stronger, more unified, more aligned parenting relationships.
Good stuff. All right, next. And of course, this never happens, but why it creates friction. Friction never happens in parenting, Drew, doesn't it? It never comes up, does it?
I don't know, Ed. You tell me. Does it ever happen in your relationship?
No, I've learned how to duck.
Okay.
I've learned how to duck. But and friction
Yeah.
happens in all relationships. Even in the best relationships, there's times of friction. So as much as we're joking about it, we acknowledge it. So friction can be a good thing if it's handled properly. So Drew, let's talk about why it creates friction.
Yeah. Well, this idea that, just tell me what needs to be done realistically still leaves one person managing the what needs to be done in terms of, well, I've now got to delegate it, which, you know, okay, I can understand that, but there's a part of me that says, well, is it that big of a deal? Having, I'd say, been on the flip side, where now in my relationship with Kristen, sometimes I'm the one being asked, just tell me what needs to be done. And I'm like, oh man, like I got to think about this. Like, how can we just work together on it? And so, and I think we both experience that on both sides. She'll experience it from me and I'll experience it from her. So I get it now. Yeah, that can definitely create tension. And there's also a big difference between this idea of helping, or owning, taking ownership. And so I think, we'll talk more specifically about the ownership piece. That's really powerful and important. And it does help, I'll say, rebalance or create a better alignment if we know who's owning what, right? The other idea is this invisible labor, sometimes, and which is this mental load, can often lead to resentment if it's never surfaced in a healthy way. So those are some thoughts. I'm going to pass over to you while I recover, my throat
Yeah,
recovers.
no problem. And when we're talking about this, we need to look at the emotional impact on both partners. Not just actually not only just both partners, but also the kids too, right? This everything that's done will just not only have an impact on you, dad, but also on your partner and your kids. And a lot of times it's not just at that moment, but it could be for the future. So we really have to be aware of the emotional impact, not only at the moment, but potentially going forward. So we really have to be aware of that emotional impact that it can have. So we got Drew back, and then we're going to get now to from overloaded to aligned. Drew seems to like this word aligned, so we brought it up again. So, what do you have to say about overloaded to aligned?
Well, we're going to suggest three different shifts that you could take to help move you and your relationship and your partner from being mentally overloaded to being a little bit more aligned. Take it or leave it. They're just suggestions, but we think that if you were able to implement maybe at least one of them, we'll think that you might see a positive difference. You pick whatever works best for you. So, Ed, I'll talk about maybe the first one, see how my voice goes, and then you can
Yeah,
hop in
we'll
there.
ping pong. We'll ping pong.
Yeah. So the first shift is moving from this idea of task based thinking. Hey, and typically, again, gross generalization, men tend to be very task oriented, to ownership based thinking. So, what this sounds or looks like is instead of, oh, I can help with bedtime, you can actually say, well, bedtime is mine. And that means that you've got full ownership, including the planning of the bedtime, prepping for bedtime, and the follow through to make sure it happens the way it's supposed to happen. That's the difference between, you're kind of just like waiting, okay, tell me what to do essentially when you're helping with bedtime versus, no, I got it. I'm going to make sure it all happens. And you begin taking ownership of that. And I think that's a very powerful and important concept. An example, Kristen has essentially taken ownership of kind of meals and meal planning and meal time and meal execution. I still do groceries or I still might offer input, but she literally owns it. It's almost like I don't even have to think about it because I know she's got it. And that's her taking a huge ownership on a big piece, especially when you have a family of seven. So that's just an example there.
Yeah. Um, I will talk about shift number two, and we talked about mental load. We want to challenge you to take a mental load audit. So think about what areas does your partner manage by default? Then also, where can you take full responsibility? And I'm glad I have a chance to talk about this because I remember someone told me about the word responsibility. It's response and ability. Response and ability, responsibility. So what areas can you take full responsibility? Take ownership, saying this is mine. And another challenge at times, having open, blame free conversation. Conversation is one of the foundations. Conversation, relationship are foundations to fatherhood, parenthood, the whole bit. So if you don't have it already, how can you make even a 1% start on having open, free, blame free conversation? Again, those things are really, really important. As I said, what areas does your partner manage by default? Where can you take full responsibility saying, this is mine? Not I'll help with this is mine. And then have that open, blame free conversation. Drew, shift number three.
Shift number three is build systems, not reminders. And really, what this is, and I'll reference James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits. Here, I think his quote says, "We do not fall to the no, we do not rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our systems." That's really what he's saying is that you can have the best of intentions and want to do things and in your mind be like, yeah, I want to be as aligned as possible. But if you don't create a system that actually supports that value and it works effectively, you're most likely going to fall to the level of whatever system or lack of system you have. And that's because the reality is life hits, and sometimes and that can throw us into confusion or other things if we don't have a system in place. And so I think that's the idea here is what's the most basic simple system that can work. Shared calendars is a simple system of scheduling and knowing who's going to be where and when and who's going to be responsible for that. Having a system of weekly 10-minute check-in or connection conversations is absolutely crucial. Having clear delineation of who is going to take ownership of what aspect of the family or of the operation of kind of the household is really important. If you don't have clarity on any of those things, you don't really have a system. Your system sounds like chaos. And again, this isn't to be a judgmental or critical. Even the most basic of system is better than nothing. So that 1 degree shift is if you have never actually sat down to talk with your partner about how they're feeling, or about in terms of the shared responsibilities. The first and most important thing I'd encourage you to do is just find a way to talk for at least 10 minutes, and do that every single week for the next like 4 to 6 weeks as a great starting point. So systems and structure is literally your best friend, as well as a vehicle to help create stronger alignment over time. That 1 degree shift repeated for a long period of time can ultimately take you 5, 10, 15 years down the road in a very different place.
Excellent. And we're going to have Drew just go through our last point, real life example. So I know he's got something up his sleeve.
A real life example of a before and after scenario. So I'll go back to the mealtime. Kristen's heart is just to simply serve all of us and serve the whole family. And so, you know, there when it came to meal planning, she was often asking everyone like, "Well, what do you want? What do you hear?" And so, while that's valuable and wonderful, there wasn't really I'd say, defined structure, as well as her capacity to know that whatever she plans, and she likes to eat a certain way, which I think is healthy for the whole family. Whatever she plans is really what we should all be eating. But in her desire to serve, she was just constantly, kind of almost, I'd say, sacrificing herself in the interest of pleasing everyone else. And so we sat down, and we just started talking about it. And I said, look, we all can eat whatever is prepared. While it may not be ideal, it's actually better for us all because in the long run, you create and build healthy and delicious meals. So I fully trust you with that. So, I basically said, well, what do you need from me to be able to help support that? And so, one, it was full ownership of kind of the budget. Like, hey, here's we agreed on a budget amount, and that was the amount that she could use. So within that, you buy and do whatever you want. But then it was also a little bit of a planning structure in terms of, well, let's create a weekly meal plan that allows some flexibility, but also some, meeting our needs as well as helping serve what the kids are looking for. And so I'd say, she's taken that on, and, she has, I'd say, shifted and began preparing meals as well as going and getting what she felt was necessary without any input from me. Every now and then she'd keep defaulting to, well, what do you want, Drew? And really asking me. I said, look, I fully trust you, like whatever you want. So without belaboring the point, bottom line is before it was a little bit always trying to serve everyone else. Now is built off of a plan and a structure. And I think it works quite well.
Excellent. So let's do a little recap today. So we talked about what is the mental load. We talked about from overloaded to aligned. Then we had a real life example. And we also talked about what is the mental load at the beginning. So, takeaways. The mental load is about responsibility, not just chores. Helping is reactive. Ownership is proactive. I like that. Helping is reactive. Over ownership is proactive. Man, that needs to go on a t-shirt. Dad's t-shirt. When we ever have a Dad's Central t-shirt line, I like that. Well, that'd be a great t-shirt, front and back. Then alignment reduces stress, resentment, and emotional distance. And then small, consistent shifts create major relational impact. Drew, what's our resource for our family today?
Well, Ed, we've got a variety of resources, but there's two that are on the website that I'll guide people to. So one is our book, Renovate Your Relationship. It's 14 tools for building a healthy, strong partnership after having a baby. The other one is our guide for dads living in step or blended families. So I think both offer some tremendous resource and value depending on your family context and family situation.
Excellent. So, as we close out, a few things. First of all, want to question you. Are you helping or are you aligned? Then, Want to encourage the dads, fathers, and meal givers to take one area this week and fully own it. And we want you also to think about reinforcing the bigger vision, stronger partnership, calmer home, better modeling for kids. So, as always, you are watching Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. Our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care because Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. And we want to have you give us questions. Email us. Email your question to podcast@dadcentral.ca. And on top of that, too, if you haven't subscribed, why not? You're here, and we know there are many people watch, they don't subscribe. Please subscribe. And if you have subscribed, thank you so much. Tell other people about it. So as always, we want to thank you for giving the most important thing, your time, to hang out with us today. And as always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. And remember to give yourself grace, and we'll chat with you soon. Be well.